The online era of RL Esports enforced by the COVID-19 pandemic gave us a uniquely wonderful, yet simultaneously cursed, era of RLCS competition. While RLCS Season X saw RL Esports capitalize on the industry boom with expansion into an open circuit format, RLCS Season 9 is the one we'd rather all forget about. From the awkward, abrupt transition to remote broadcasts, to the cancelled World Championship that robbed fans of many international dream matches, to Karen vs Stonkers being an actual match that happened on the main channel, like all sports, real or digital, the COVID era was a fever dream in a sense. Yet looking back, something that no one remembers is we had RLCS matches on a Monday. How and why were there RLCS matches on a Monday in Season 9, you might be thinking. It's not like there was an open circuit with a surplus of matches, just a short league play that had as many series in a single season as most Swiss brackets. And it's not like the season had to be rushed either. There was no LAN, right? Well, let's rewind to 5 years ago. 5 years, holy shit. 5 years ago, specifically to January and February of 2020. The 2 months of 2020 when COVID wasn't a global pandemic. The 2 months of 2020 when the world wasn't shut down. Society was functioning as normal, I was attending an Irish LAN, life was good. After RLCS Season 8 wrapped up in December of 2019, Season 9 started pretty quickly the next month, with the especially short turnover of just 6 weeks being far shorter than the 3 to 4 month breaks we were accustomed to back in the league play era. This meant the season would run from February to April to make room in the summer for the much anticipated Inter World Open and Nations tournaments set to take place on LAN in Katowice and Tokyo. This brings us to week 1 of the RLCS. A lot of anticipation given the plethora of new fans brought in from the relatively recent Season 8 finals, and the servers are down. Which for the time was quite common, although this time it was a host issue from Google, not Soniqs themselves to be fair. A 15-minute delay turned into a 30-minute intermission screen, only for Leafex to come back and tell us that week 1 of the RLCS had been postponed. Provisionally, the entire online season was pushed back a week, with RLCS Season 9 league play starting now on February 8th, a week after the initial attempt. But this was an issue, given it shortened the turnover from the Regional Championship to the World Championship from 4 weeks to 3 weeks. And at this point, the World Championship was still going ahead. This was only early February of 2020. What the hell even was a coronavirus anyways, guys? It'll pass. Oh, how naive we were. The solution was announced on February 14th. Week 3's matches that had just the 5 games in both EU and NA will be moved to a special double-header broadcast on March 9th towards the back half of the season after week 6, which was now week 5. Or as I like to call it, Super Monday. This double-header broadcast would see 5 European matches and then immediately followed up by 5 North American matches on a Monday. There had previously been a rescheduled league play day back in Season 5 when the power cut out in the studio during the EU show, meaning the matches got pushed to the next Thursday, but this was unprecedented. 10 matches on one broadcast with double painted drops? Lots of time was needed to prepare, but man, it just added to the excitement and hype. Unfortunately, however, this juggernaut of a show would not occur during a time of high community spirits. As just 4 days before it was set to take place, Soniqs announced the RLCS Season 9 World Championship was cancelled due to the coronavirus pandemic. With hindsight, it was a very smart decision, especially given how ahead of the curve Soniqs was given the pandemic's imminent repercussions in society. But in the moment, it was a bitter pill to swallow for fans and players alike. What makes this predicament all the more interesting though, is this all happened right before the mega RLCS weekend, where Week 5 for NE and EU would happen on Saturday and Sunday respectively, before Week 6's Super Monday doubleheader broadcast would immediately follow it the very next day. And especially from a broadcast POV, there is no way that when the doubleheader show was initially envisioned, it was meant to be the third ever remote RLCS show that just so happened to be a 9-hour marathon. If you've ever worked in the industry, you know that trying to pull that off after spending the previous 4 years working in a live environment in a studio, that is a concoction of circumstances that just screams curse. Alas, the RLCS pushed on, and we arrived at Super Monday. No pre-show because, well, it was a long hecking day, so buckle in and sit your ass down for the only ever Monday show in RLCS history. Kicking off the marathon day of RLCS was FC Barcelona, consisting of Ronicky, Devo and Flakes, taking on Team Singularity, that being Doe, Noli, and a pre-benched Godsmith. And the first thing that saw to me was Flakes' car. He was in a bit of a troll car phase at this point, and arguably a troll playstyle of being too insistent on grounded ball control as well. But on this Barca team, when he somewhat compromised his values and played semi-standard trees, he was actually pretty effective. Singularity was a pleasant surprise this season, decently competitive versus the big dogs and grinding out W's versus the lower ranked squads. Nolly here particularly showed some class, with a nice double tap in game 3, but in this series, most Singularity goals were a product of Barca's third man being MIA. In the end though, FCB had too much class. Devo and especially Ronicky were particularly potent shooters, as Barcelona took the 3-2 victory. Next up was Endpoint versus TSM, and yeah, this was awful. But Endpoint at least showed some moments of promise. Relating Wave in particular got a very unique flip reset in Game 2, and the early signs of Virtuoso's famed bumps and demos were evident here in Game 3. But otherwise, this was just painful from TSM. Metsonaurus and Remco had been struggling for quite a while, and when Alpha 4 departed for Vitality, there was just no saving this team. Remco in particular, look, one of my all-time favorite players, but he was directly responsible for 3 or 4 Endpoint goals by himself due to multiple missed touches and kickoff fails. I'll make it up for him and maybe do a video in the future on why he's an all-time great, but yeah, not his finest hour. Endpoint won 3-0. Let's move on. Veloce versus mousesports saw Europe's infamous bus parkers finally get broken down, as Kuxer, Swede and Scrubkala got a huge 3-0 win over Freaky Flame and Casio. In Game 1, they survived the war of attrition and grinded out the win in OT, and in Game 2 they made great use of the ceiling to break down Veloce. And throughout the entire series, the Mouse players' ability to beat multiple defenders by themselves is what cleared the way to success. To this point, mousesports had a decent season, but had just gotten the expected results. But with this sweep, they looked like they could push on to that next level. Until Scrub kind of left the team 2 weeks later, but we won't talk about that. Reciprocity versus Monaco, on the other hand, was yet another addition in the confusing tales of both team seasons. For Rec, they were just weird at this point. Still close to the top, but missing that killer edge that resulted in their world top in 2019. Some of these season 9 matches they played way too close to their opponent's level, but thankfully, Monaco, unbeknownst to everyone, was one of the worst league play teams of all time. Yes, this is the infamous 0-9 season for Monaco, and while this wasn't their most egregious loss, it was a very frustrating one. Not through any fault of Extra, however, he was quite literally Monaco's only goal scorer, and regularly at that. With some big whiffs from iUnited and Tigre being out of position, ended up giving Reciprocity multiple simple goals to take the series dub 3-1. Also want to note at this point, because the RLCS broadcast was now a fully remote operation for the first time ever, this allowed Shogun to return to casting league play for the first time since RLCS Season 5. And this match was his first non-LAN cast since spring of 2018. Yep, since this is Rocket League, we had only heard him at the DreamHack Pro Circuit and Season 8 Worlds. That's it. And speaking of Season 8 Worlds, it's defined by two things. NRG finally doing what they could not do before, and maybe the greatest match of all time? Or at least top two in my mind, when Dignitas played Vitality in that incredible semi-final. The final EU match of Super Monday was the much anticipated rematch, but with a twist. Obviously, Vitality now had Alpha 54 in place of Scrub Killer, but more significantly, Dignitas looked like they'd leveled up and were arguably just a better squad now. Definitively, these were the two best teams in Europe. Arguably, they were the top two in the world at this moment. The series starts and man, this Dignitas roster of Panda, Yukio and Astral was on another level with their passing. How they found each other so well and so consistently in threatening spots was genuinely absurd. A good passing play will always age well. Just like Astral's POV this series. Out of everyone in Europe at this point, Astral is the one that moves like a modern 2025 player. The clear best player in Europe this season. Even when I knew the scores watching back, I found myself leaning forward when Astral was on the ball. That's how incredible he was. Dignitas went up 2-0, and you have a vague memory of Season 9, that sounds about right. But this wasn't the regional final. This was the regular season league play match, and Vitality had something to prove. One slight misconception with this specific Vitality trio is Alpha 54 joined and was immediately the best. That was not the case. It took him all of that season to get comfortable alongside K-Dub and Fairy Peak. Yeah, in Spring Series and RLCS X, Alpha was him, but not here. Not that that mattered much because K-Dub and especially Fairy Peak in early 2020 were still world-class talents. Not the flashiest players, but they were remarkably efficient with their movement and shooting. If they could snuff out the Dignitas infield pass and get a counterattack going, because Dig would go all in, justifiably backing their passing mastery, Fairy Peak and K-Dub feasted on the bevy of 2v1 and even 2v2 scenarios presented to them, as they reverse swept Dignitas, and ended the day back on top of Europe for the time being. With EU done, following a half-hour intermission, the second half of Super Monday commenced with the North American RLCS. Opening proceedings was the high-flying Spacestation Gaming taking on Flight. And this is AXB era SSG, who, shout out to him, had his best ever season in RLCS Season 9. His shooting was just top tier every week. With this series specifically, it was super routine. Rapid, Memory, and Seabass only scored when SSG gave them handouts, otherwise they were pretty miserable. And against an SSG squad with arguably all three players in career peak form, it was no wonder this was a quick 3-0, as at this point, Spacestation had ascended to top team status in NA. Next up was eUnited versus the Susquehanna Soniqs. And guys, remember when Shock was the NA MVP? It's an MVP award that with hindsight leans very heavily into the V of MVP. Cause Shock was really doing everything for Soniqs this season. To his teammates' credit, Dapper particularly in this match was on hand to consistently set up Shock with bumps and demos, while Satyu didn't put a foot wrong at any point this match. It does also help that this was a match where eUnited offered very little in terms of resistance. Unsurprisingly, eUnited only threatened when Hoxer was involved. This was not long after he was denied a move to Cloud9, and man, it hurts to think how many quality Hoxer years we missed out on. Another simple 3-0, this time for the Susquehanna Soniqs. When you think of Season 9, you probably think of G2. And with Dignitas falling earlier in the day across the pond, G2 was the last undefeated team across EU and NA. So of course Gibbs predicted Ghost Gaming to win here. On some moderate hater energy, this undefeated start did benefit from a fairly lax strength of schedule, and Ghost was pretty obviously G2's biggest test at this point. One which G2 would not pass. With hindsight, this is a whatever result, but watching here, you can really see the levels Atomic and Mist were capable of. It's no surprise that when G2 had their 5 tournament spree a few weeks later, this Ghost roster was the closest to snapping that. More significantly, however, the reaction to Ghost being G2 here was yet another sign that the Big 3 era was dead. G2 was still a top team, but them losing here was no longer this earth-shattering major historical event. Ghost turned up, played better ball, and won. It was as simple as that. Rogue vs Pittsburgh Knights was a showcase of 6 players all at a point in their careers they'd probably rather forget about. Rogue in Season 9 had replaced the outgoing AJ with young rookie First Killer, pairing him with Krenovi and Wonder. And well, without their star player, things were not so great. But FK was slowly finding his feet. Still inconsistent at this point, but his RLCS career was not even 2 months old yet. By the end of this season, he was already on a path to greatness. The player he had replaced, AJ, had himself gone over to the Knights with Renault and Gyro. And yeah, AJ replacing Mist just did not work. This trio just didn't synergize. Their lacking defense was painfully evident and gave them some very soft goals here. Reynolds was at the heart of the PK Alphans, and individually he was still a top 10 talent in the region despite the Knights' struggles. But this series turned out to be the point of no return for this specific roster. Rogue took the unexpected series win by 3 games to 2, and while it didn't save their season, it did show a level of promise they could build on for future seasons. Inversely, this loss condemned the Knights to mediocrity, and just reinforced the fact that these 3 players, while talented, did not work together. Closing out the action, match 10 out of 10, and on paper, it's a blockbuster. It's RLCS Season 6 World Champions Cloud9 versus RLCS Season 8 World Champions NRG. This was actually the first ever RLCS match between 2 former World Champion rosters of 3. As in, these 2 specific rosters of 3 were former World Champions at this point. I bet the guy who found out that stat was pretty handsome. But in the lead up to this match, unlike G2 who were recovering well from Season 8's disaster class, Cloud9 was at serious threat of being automatically relegated out of the league. They were barely above flighting Rogue at this point. Contrasted to NRG, who were still the assumed and proven top dogs, I need to remind you, reigning world champions, and nothing but a lopsided below what was expected. We got exactly that, just not in the way anyone thought. As if it were 2018 all over again, Cloud9 played good. In fact, they played great, hitting the big shots, rotating well, and just outpacing their opponents without caution. It was fantastic to see, but also so confusing, given C9 performances for the past 2 seasons had ranged from poor to awful. Speaking of poor and or awful, NRG, what the hell even was that? Nothing takes away from Cloud9's trio, but man, NRG might have well not even loaded into the server. They were just nowhere this match. I cannot emphasize enough how shocking this match was. Cloud9, for a lack of a better phrase, was finished as a roster. And honestly, this result didn't save them. Sure, they ended up in the playoffs, but Ghost beat them quite handily. Yet they somewhat took NRG or Turbo down with them. Or at least put the biggest blow into the NRG plot armor that seemed impenetrable to that point, as their famed World Championship winning roster would slowly fizzle out before Squishy himself joined a few months later. So, that was the RLCS's ill-fated Monday stream. Watching it back, it's no wonder it's been forgotten. The European results were fairly run-of-the-mill, with the big clash at the top between Dignitas and Vitality now being invalidated by the regional final rematch 3 weeks later. And then in NA, only a handful of teams really looked in form here, although maybe that's also 2020 gameplay now finally looking poor by modern standards. It does not help the broadcast quality was not particularly the greatest. The talent did their best, but it took ESL coming in from Spring Series and RLCS to make these remote broadcasts look and sound proper, as it would become the new normal. Regardless, even if it's fairly unmemorable in hindsight, at the time, 3 consecutive days of RLCS action with 9 hours on a Monday when we were all locked inside anyways, it provided a much needed distraction from the chaos that was life in spring of 2020. If you've enjoyed this look back on one of the more weird times in RL Esports history, a like and subscribe is always appreciated. But until the next time, much love, take care, and peace.